That means my live stream is up and running, sort of, right? That's good. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, you're having a good day. Yeah. Today is the 11th of January, 2023. I'm Roy Potter, of course, and red is not my color on camera. I'm surprised it's actually holding the balance in the rest of the picture. Usually, if I wear red, it just throws everything off, including my face. People say I throw my face around anyway. It throws it off, regardless. However, I thought it would be fitting for me to wear red tonight because what we're going to talk about has a lot of caveats, and you got to treat it with a little care, a little caution. So hence the red, I think, is probably going to let you know about that. At least I hope so. The other day, as I was doing a live stream, I saw I didn't see it at the time, but I did go through the chat, something I don't normally do, but on some of these, when I reach into some what I consider to be controversial topics, every once in a while I'll go back and look at the chat and the comments. And in the chat, there was a question about Qaneh Bessem, and they wanted me to talk about it. And then as you read on down through the chat, they bring up that it has to do, they think, with cannabis, marijuana, okay, the weed, right? And there were a lot of comments about, well, Roy doesn't use that, and that's true, I don't. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it. I certainly wouldn't inhale it as burning it. I definitely wouldn't do that. But I could see it being used as a medicinal product for healing or for getting people well. It's very good for nausea. It's very good for helping healing wounds. It has some other effects that it can help cure. Well, I better be careful. I better not say that because it helps to make things better. Let's just put it that way. And some people say, yeah, the way it makes your brain feel. But I've seen some evidence in it, and of course, it was refused as a medical product for a long time. It's still on the Schedule One prohibited drug list of the federal government, and yet a lot of states have legalized it in the face of what the feds have done. And there's been a lot of study on it to show that it does have, according to these people that are doing the studies, and I kind of go along with it, it has medicinal purposes. But I thought that it would be a good subject to talk about. It would certainly get some attention. Not that that's what I'm looking for, but I think it was a legitimate question yesterday evening, and I thought this will be another example of how I can show that in the Hebrew, when it's taken over into other languages, be it Greek, Latin, or English at this case, there's some problems with it. And I'm going to wait to make my judgment call on what this is until we get to the end of this little video, okay, till I get done with my presentation. In the community post on my YouTube site, you go to the community post, and it was the last post of the one before it, somewhere in there. I have a post from my Twitter account explaining what I'm going to do now, and it doesn't go into much detail. It's just kind of whetting your appetite. So if you want to go there and look at that, you're more than welcome to. I also mentioned it on Twitter, and in the description box, and in a comment in the last video, I also put basically the same information, but added a few things. For instance, that the word is often translated as cinnamon, and I'm going to show that there's a problem with that. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not saying it isn't cinnamon, the spice cinnamon, but there are some problems with that in the translation, and I'm going to kind of show you why that's probably not what it is. Okay, not saying it isn't, but it's well. Let's just get into it, and then you'll know. Okay, so the question was about Qaneh Bessem, and this is spelled phonetically, sometimes with a K, sometimes with a Q. In Hebrew, it's a kuf, and I'm not gonna put the Hebrew words up right now. I think that would probably just confuse people. But I'll kind of give you a rundown on what it is. Okay, it definitely has to do with what happens to the head. Kuf is the back of the head. Reish is the front of the head. So this isn't going to give you, like LSD type of experiences affecting the cerebral cortex. It's the back of the brain, at the back of the brain, if anything. So it has to do with healing. It has to do with instinct. It has to do with those kinds of things. Okay. But anyway, let me give you a little background information, and then we'll go down the list here. As you can see, I've said, is it cannabis or cinnamon? Well, I think it kind of depends on the context, and I'm going to show you some situations where it actually, to me, actually, honestly, it looks like to me that the one that they refer to, which is in Exodus 30:23, and you can look that up if you want. It basically says cinnamon uh, in the translation, but in fact, spicy cinnamon actually, but in fact, it comes closer to the idea of cannabis. In the other translation, in the other scriptures where it's mentioned, the spicy part is left out. So I think we're actually talking about two different things. Okay, I don't think that anointing the head with a cinnamon oil or spice. And that kind of thing in Exodus would be what we're talking about. We're probably talking really about this. And that's my judgment call on it. There'll be some disagreement on that amongst the scholars and amongst people in general, people that don't think that any drug is right, and those who realize that God has placed certain things here for us for our use. And then, of course, the difference with the pharmaceuticals, which are actually poisons in different doses. But at any rate, so let me just dive into this, and this is just kind of a free for all tonight in some regard. Hi, Walter, how you doing? Let's see, watchful and alert. Watchful and alert. Was that you that put that up about the Qaneh Bessem? I'm not sure if it was. Was that or Watchtower somebody? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let me go ahead and get into this, and then maybe we can have a little discussion afterwards. But I think it'll be kind of interesting. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with using natural, earth-grown, organic substances in plants that are found in nature. If you distill them, if you turn them into like opiates, from the poppy plant, if you start to distill that to make it stronger, then it becomes a problem. But its natural state, I'm not even saying there's a problem there. Of course, we know that in South America, a coca plant was used to relieve pain and help people to have some extra stamina in the fields when they're working, etc. So these things are good. It's when they're abused to the point, and you can abuse anything. I mean, I've heard of people, you probably have too. There was a radio station, I brought this up months, maybe years ago. Radio station was doing a contest on who could drink the most water. And a lady who drank too much water actually died from too much water in her body. So you can overdo anything. It's moderation in all things is really what it is. And unfortunately, because of the way that corporate America, the corporations in general, have wanted to seize control of all of our resources for themselves so they can make money, they've made these natural substances illegal so that you'll have to buy their really, really bad lab-produced things, which are basically distilling these things down and making them worse. It's sort of like the difference between drinking beer, which is usually around 5% normal, or wine, which is normally, if you ferment it just normally, around 7-8% maybe, something like that. But then distilling it and making it into a higher grade alcohol, like brandy from wine, that kind of thing. And then you're entering the realm of monkeying around with nature, okay? And I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about taking it in its natural form, okay? In my book, The Crimson Thread, I won't pull it out. I made a point that it was very likely that a lot of the so-called healing miracles in the New Testament and even in the Old Testament were actually just skillful physicians, skillful men or women who understood these plants and knew how to administer them and skillfully administer them to treat illness, disease, etc. And I think that's really the case by and large. You remember the one scene with Jesus where supposedly there was a blind man and he took some mud off the ground and then spit in it. Well, it could have been that he also had something in his pouch that he needed to wet, and then use the mud to help to transfer it to the guy's eyes, and it may have taken a fungus off or a bacteria. Who really knows what was going on there? But my point was in the book that they use natural substances in a lot of these healing things. They weren't miracles as such. In regards to that, there are uh, there are many evidences that the Qumran community, which were the Essenes, actually had a therapeutate. Dr. Robert Eisenman talks about that in his Dead Sea Scroll work. Philo, for instance, mentions a therapeutate in Egypt. And a lot of, as I mentioned in my book, a lot of the Qumranians actually went to Egypt, particularly On, which is where there was another temple there in On. I talked about that in my book and in some of my Eisenman and religion series. And it's very likely that it was in that same area that the therapeutate existed. There were probably separate Egyptian therapeutates, which is what Philo would have been talking about, but he could have also been talking about the Jewish therapeutate there as well. Okay, so those things have existed for a long time, and I think that really what we saw in the New Testament, I'm just looking at this from a reasonable point of view. I don't mean to be stirring up the ire and passion of Christians and New Testament believers, but it's very, very much a possibility realistic, and there's nothing wrong with these great men and women having learned how to use these plants in a skillful medicinal manner. I'm not saying that Jesus sat there and toked on a marijuana, joint. I'm not saying that. As a matter of fact, I don't think that ever happened. There's some indications that the Romans smoked opium. Yeah, there is some indication of that. But I don't think anybody down there in Qumran or Jesus or any of those people would use it that way. It would be, for an ointment. It would be for some other topical use, or maybe internal, depending upon the circumstances. Nausea, for instance, they could have had somebody take a little bit of the plant and let it sit in their mouth, and then they swallow it and it takes away the nausea. Those kinds of things. Yeah, I think that's very possible. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail on that. There's a great deal of difference between those things and what it talks about in Revelation about the wealthy men of the earth who would deceive the world with their sorceries, which of course is the word pharmakia or pharmaceuticals, which is where we are today. And we've seen that in action in the last few decades, but especially in the last few years. Okay, with all of that, let's get into this and see. Tinctures, yeah, they would have made tinctures. Thank you, Cynthia Wood. Yeah, same kind of thing. Ointments, tinctures, creams, teas, things like that. Or, they may have actually ground up the plant and made a kind of early pill with just the natural substance. I'm not saying I understand exactly how they did it, but I'm certain that that was the case. I mean, we've seen that in history. A lot of that has worked in history. And after the Christian thing came about, and I mentioned this in my Twitter post, in the post here on YouTube, and in the description box of the last video, I mentioned that people who had that skill, because they weren't invoking Jesus for everything. Jesus healed you. Jesus will heal you. If you don't put this in Jesus's name, then you're a witch. If you're using these potions, these tinctures, these plants to help people, then you're a witch, and we're going to burn you at the stake, or we're going to put you in the dunker and drown you in the water. Right? That's the history of Christianity. More so than people want to admit. And of course, there was a whole thing with the Inquisition there too. But those things existed, and it's because it didn't go along with the status quo and the traditional expectation, the cult of Jesus. And I'm just going to put it that way. Okay, you might not like it, but that's basically what it was. So if you didn't submit to the cult of Jesus and that he's responsible for everything that happens, then you were a heretic. And if you use these substances to help people, you were considered witchcraft, sorcerers. Okay, and it's wrong, because good herbs have been used for healing people for thousands and thousands of years, probably as long as man's been on the earth, which may be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. As I mentioned, Nikolai Tesla, I mentioned this, I don't know, a week ago or so. Nikolai Tesla said, man may, the individual person may be ephemeral, in other words, temporal, here for a short time, but man as a family has been around for eternity. Okay, big difference. All right, let's get back into this. So, is it a fact or could it be reasonable that the word cannabis comes from Qaneh Bessem, which is actually mentioned in Exodus 30, 23. And it is two words there. It's Qaneh and Bessem. Uh, let me back up just a little bit more. Cannabis has its roots, and you can look this up if you like, has its roots in Scythian language, which went to Greek and Latin. But the fact of the matter is, the Scythians may have gotten it from the Hebrews. We're not sure which way it went, but they appeared about the same time or with the same kind of emphasis. So Scythian language and Hebrew, it went one way or the other. We're not sure. The word cannabis, what you would know as cannabis now, in the Hebrew, it's kinemon, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And that has Scythian, Latin, and Greek roots. Anyway, that would of course be what this is, what most people consider to be the spice, okay, or the herb, cinnamon. And I've got this big question mark, and the reason why I have Selah up there is because, I don't know, what was it, a month or two ago, maybe not that long ago, maybe a few weeks, I talked about in Psalms, they use the word Selah at the end of the psalm, and nobody really knows what it means, not even the scholars. They left it as Selah because they weren't sure, but they thought it might mean a pause in the music, or maybe a suspension, that kind of thing. And then I showed you that that's not it at all. It's because they didn't know Natarikon, or they don't want to use it to break the word down into the letters to find out what the meaning is. And I showed you in that video that the word Selah means strengthen him, prop him up with your power. So it was kind of like an end of a prayer. The psalm would be said, and then everybody would say together Selah, which would mean, talking about the king, prop him up, support him with your power. That's what Selah means. There's a place called Selah too. That's mentioned in Kings, 2 Kings. There's one instance of it there. It's definitely a place. And then in Psalms, there are dozens of those. Again, coming at the end, they're basically prayers at the end of the psalm to ask for God to support the king. And there are 3 in Habakkuk, which are very similar to that. Okay, it's not about musicians. Okay, it's not about pausing. It's not that kind of a thing. So I showed you that happens in Hebrew a lot when they don't know what it is. Well, the word cinnamon is in Hebrew is word 7076. If you go to, first of all, go to Exodus 30:23, and you'll see there where it's used in conjunction with another word, and that's Bessem. So they use the word 7076 together with Bessem, which is word 1314. Both of these are on the Hebrew side. And together it means spicy, reed-like plant. Spicy, stalky plant is what it means. Now, that's not necessarily the cinnamon that we see throughout the rest of the Bible. But what does happen, the cinnamon here, is, again, the word is kinemon. Kinemon, sounds very much like cinnamon, right? Kinemon. But because of the changes in the time and the culture and all that, we could be seeing the same thing that we kind of saw with Selah, that this is not so much even a single plant, but a kind of plant. In other words, many plants of that type that have this spicy, stalky construction. So it doesn't necessarily mean the cinnamon that you're aware of today. Now, there is, of course, evidence of cinnamon in history. It goes back, 2800 BC or something like that. And I'm talking about the regular spice from the Middle East and from the Far East. But this example in Exodus 30:23 is being very specific about a type of cinnamon, a type of kinemon. All right, and again, it's using this word Qaneh. All right, and it's actually the actual word is like I said, kinamon, but the root is this Qaneh kind of an idea, and then Bessem. So of course, when you kind of put those together, which is what some modern Hebrew speaking people did, you get cannabis, right? So what the word is that the current Hebrew people use to say that this is actually the cannabis plant, and I'm not totally agreeing with it, but I'm not totally disagreeing with it either. I think it can go either way. The word that they put together, the combined word putting these two up like this, is uh, kind of bosom. That's not quite right. Uh, Cannabosis, cannabosis, I guess would be the better way to put it. And what I've done is to show you where I got that. In the description box below are two links to an explanation that goes into more detail than I'm going to be able to give you here. They're not real long articles, but it might give you some indications, some new ideas, another way to look at this. It'll show you the etymology of some of these words uh, and also how they developed. And they'll plainly tell you that it's in the Hebrew. That they'll make the argument that it's probably from the Hebrew and then moved into the Scythian later. But regardless, the point is that the word cannabis apparently is the putting together of those two words, Qaneh and Bessem, okay, which means reed or stalky, spicy plant. Okay. All right. In Greek, in Greek, let me phrase this too. There are only three places that this word kinomon is used in the Old Testament, and I've already mentioned those. It's Exodus 30:23, Proverbs 7:17, and Canticles or the Song of Solomon, uh, chapter 4:14. But only in Exodus are the two words Kone and Bessem put together right there. In Proverbs and in Canticles or the Song of Solomon, it's just uh, Kinomon by itself, which is why I think we're probably talking about two different things here, and that it's very likely that what they were really using in Exodus 20 or 30:23 was in fact the cannabis plant. I think it was. It would just make sense under the circumstances, especially the way it was used as an anointing oil in that regard. And then of course later in the Qumranian communities, very likely as a medicinal product. And in Egypt as well. Okay, let me go back to the Greek here for a minute. And this is again one of the problems, and we saw it with the Silah information. It's kinemon in Hebrew, all right? In the New Testament, if you look this up, it is, I can't read my own handwriting. Uh, it's used in Revelation 18:17. Let me grab my glasses here. I wrote so small here, I got to see what I put down. The only other place that it's mentioned is in Revelation 18:13. I think that's right, 18:13, yes. Revelation 18:13, and its word in the Greek side of Strong's, it's word 2792 for those of you who want to check it out. So now we have the Hebrew word of uh, uh, kinomon, which is in the Hebrew side 7076, then Besem, which is in the Hebrew side 1314, and now we're looking at the only evidence of it in the Greek scriptures, which is in Revelation 18:13, and there it's not a translation. It's a transliteration of the Hebrew and the Greek and the Scythian. And so it's very interesting if you go and look at that. It's in the Greek. It's either kina momon, or cinnamomon. I'm not sure which. One of the two. I think it would probably depend a lot, like where in the Greek culture it was spoken. But basically, it's a transliteration. It's not a translation at all. Okay, it's the same. It's basically the same word, a transliteration, like what they did with Silah. Rather than saying support him with your power, they said Silah. Of course, this is basically a short prayer like Amen, and I talked about that when I brought up the Selah situation quite some time ago. So basically what we have is word 7076, which is not actually Qaneh, by the way. Qaneh is kind of a shortened version of it. It's actually the one I told you, Kinomon, all right, 7076, together with Bessem, which is Beit Shin Mem. And those two together are only seen in Exodus 30:23. All right. Okay, let's see if I want to bring up anything else here before we do a little discussion. So again, the word that the modern Hebrew people use for, and I think I'm going to write this down. Let me grab my other pen, because what they did was they combined those two words. And I probably should have done this before I started, but here we go. Qaneh, Bessem. So actually, it's going to look like this. I'll do it here. I can do it up here. What they did was they took those two words, and you can look those up, but this is the modern Hebrew idea of cannabis. You have the kuf, the nun, the bait. Pardon me, I'm almost writing upside down here, so it might not be quite right. A vav and a samik. Okay? All right. So they took those two words from the Hebrew Bible and they made a modern word, cannabis. All right? So the information that cannabis is a biblical Hebrew word is not quite true. Not quite true. It's going back to the idea of the spicy cinnamon. The question is that just referring to a type of plant? And of course, if you've seen a marijuana plant, the stalks are very reedy, right? They're very stalky. And of course, they are spicy in regards that they have a lot of aroma to them. So, considering the circumstances with all of the evidence that I've seen here, I do believe that both historically, you can prove that cannabis has been used as a medicine for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. It grows easily just about anywhere, which would be nice. God would, put a medicinal plant out there available for everyone. I think that would make sense. You don't have to cultivate it. It really is a weed. It just grows in almost any place. I understand it's best in sandy soil, but I'm not really sure about that. CBD is a great medicine waiting for Jesus. Yeah. I won't comment anyway. John Doe, hey, how you doing? So I think it's been around for a long time, and there are other medicinal herbs that were used along with it, but this one's going to get all the press because of what's happened in the 20th century to put down any natural treatments so that the pharmaceutical companies could make their millions and billions, and the governments could control you and steal your property if you're caught with something that's naughty for you to have, even though it grows everywhere. You get the idea. Just as Isaiah says, the world will go away backwards. They will make evil good and good evil, and it just never stops with these guys. You know how I feel about them over here. I don't like them at all. And of course, they've influenced, along with the UN drug schedules and all that. This has really been bad for the world. I can kind of understand the distilled drugs that could be dangerous. For instance, today's fentanyl as an example. But medicinal herbs in their natural state, and you use those, there should be no laws against that anywhere. And what that is, it's a matter of control and suppression and tyranny and taxation, financial, right? Okay. Let me see if I've missed anything here. I think I've pretty much told you everything. Yeah, I might as well write this down too. So Qaneh is spelled like this, and this is in the Bible. Qaneh like this is in the Bible, okay? And it means a reed or a stalk, So it's this one here. It has a pay. I hope you guys can see this. And a nun and a hey. I can't write too well upside down, but that's what it looked like. And then Bessem would be, and I think I've shown you this already, the bait, the shin, and the final mem. That's what those would look like. So those actually that actually exists in the Hebrew like that as well. But as a word, when you look it up in Exodus, it's actually the word I showed you, kinomon, kinomon. And that's probably a class of plants. It's probably not the spice that they're talking about elsewhere in the scriptures, okay, both in Psalms and in Canticles. Not saying for a fact, but I would be very surprised if, as I just said, that the cannabis plant was not used as a medicinal herb throughout the entire world, and certainly by the miracle workers of the New Testament period and the Qumranians who had their therapeutate in Qumran and had liaisons with the Egyptian therapeutate, like I talked about in On, which is still Hebraic, most likely, but because it's in Egypt, it's called the Egyptian therapeutate. Philo mentions it. Okay, the historian, the Jewish historian Philo, who wanted to Hellenize Judaism and turn it into a Roman-friendly thing. That's Philo. He probably also has something to do with the construction of the Gospels and some of the, at least the interpretations of them. Maybe the original Q document that he monkeyed with or did some other things with, who knows. That is all lost to history, but the evidence that's left behind is what's led me to believe that we can't take the New Testament at face value, and this is another example that a lot of the healings in there were done with the therapeutate using medicinal herbs and etc. Okay, so I wanted to present that to you tonight real quick. It's not a normal night for me on Wednesday, but I didn't want to get too far removed from the video from last night. Again, what I'm saying is that we've been lied to about so many things. This is another one. It should not be illegal. It should maybe distilling it into, like I was explaining with the difference between wine and brandy, distilling these herbal substances in such a way that they can become toxic. That's different, or enhance the effects to the point where it's deleterious in the long run, or cause addiction or those kinds of things. But that's not how it's been handled. They just blanketly say, no, you can't have any of this stuff, and it's wrong. Okay, it's wrong. It's another thing that governments have overstepped for their power, authority, financial control, and for other reasons. At this point, I think there's something to, I think everybody knows that I'm firmly convinced that they're trying to destroy humanity, okay, mankind, all right? All right, like I say, that's pretty much all my presentation. I want you got the numbers. Let me give them to you again because I really didn't write them up there. Qaneh Besem comes from Exodus 30:23. I'd suggest you look at it in all of these in the Hebrew English linear Bible, Greek, because then you can see it in the original Hebrew, and you'll know what I'm talking about. So the Qaneh is first part, cannabis, Qaneh, right, would be in the Hebrew side 7076. Then the Bessem, which would be the best part, would be Hebrew side of Strong's 1314. And if you want to go into the Greek and see, and again, it's not a translation, it's a transliteration, phonetic equivalent of that same word, which is translated as cinnamon, is in Greek side of Strong's 2792. Okay, and I think that gives everything I wanted to cover. All right. Let me see if I can answer any questions. I might have to put my glasses on to see because this is getting pretty tough. And yeah, natural remedies are always better. If you try to preempt the body, for instance, a couple that I know of that are real obvious, testosterone treatments. If you start injecting testosterone into a male, what testosterone development or production he does have is going to shut down. So it's best to use natural substances to help enhance that, whatever you find those to be. And you might have to experiment on your own to find out what your body will use to naturally develop testosterone. Um, Another example is the treatment of diabetes. When instead of injecting uh, the substances that they want to inject into you to make you produce, or not to produce, but just to replace what they think your body's not producing, it would be better if they could give you something that would help your body to produce it rather than just substitute it, because whatever it is producing, it's gonna shut down, right? So that's another example, and there's probably some others. Let me think of if there's another one here that would be nasal sprays. If you have a congestion in your nose, or that kind of thing, and you take a decongestant or those kinds of things, what you're then doing is you're keeping the body from sloughing off the disease that it's trying to get rid of, and it's just holding it in there. Now, it might clear up the breathing for a while. And sometimes it's a good idea to shrink swollen membranes, but by the same time, you're also preempting the body's natural reaction. So it's a balance. So I don't use nasal sprays, for instance, in the situation I've had. I've used hydrogen peroxide in a very mild solution, or I've used povolone, which actually Dr. McCullough suggested for the treatment of the extant sickness right now, um, in a solution. But I've been doing that for years, spraying it up there, and it doesn't act the same way as the decongestants do, but it works at not just the symptomatic level, but at the causation level. It actually kills bacteria and virus. Okay, so in the long run, it's actually better for you, and it's not preempting what your body can do to fight off the disease. Okay, yeah. Okay. Let's see if anybody has any questions here that I can. Boron also revert. Yeah, boron is good for arthritis. I understand. I've not used it for that, but boron is also good. Maybe that's why you mentioned it. It's also good for building testosterone naturally, but you got to be careful. you know, yeah, you can't use very much. It's like less than a pinch, maybe a couple times a week is all. You don't want to overdo boron either. You might turn into a washing machine, right? Um, Miracle Mineral Solution. I've heard of those. Silver throat spray. I don't want to start talking about cures or anything like that, because YouTube won't like that, and the pharmacy companies are like, he's talking about curing people of these things. I'll just say that they help to relieve maybe some of these symptoms. Let's just put it that way, okay? But I think a lot of these things you try, sometimes they'll work for the individual and sometimes they won't. It just depends. Bone broth, of course. Chicken soup, bone broth, natural treatments, very, very good. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Let's see if there's anything else here. I don't see any of my mods. I didn't, I'm getting I'm kind of lazy. I don't tell anybody that I'm going to be on. I just pop on, and then there we go. Rosemary, yeah. Now again, I would love to talk about all these things, but if they start thinking that if I'm pushing or allowing to push, quote unquote QURES, then they're going to get upset. I'm not saying that, right? Cannabis and cinnamon, yeah, and cinnamon is good. Cinnamon's very good. For instance, I think it's really good for. I got to be careful here. I better not go too far. Cinnamon is good for you, though. Absolutely, it absolutely is. Uh, yeah, you guys can talk about all those if I do, and actually, if they see it in the chat, they'll shut the chat down and probably give me a strike. Ginger and garlic are good. Again, see, so these natural remedies, they may not work as fast as the manufactured things that they want you to buy, but they don't preempt your natural body immunity and bodily systems and override them. And that's the important part. Okay, that's the important part. I let them cry. Oh, I would, except they're very vindictive, and I think how many videos have I had taken down? They've taken videos down I don't even know about. And I found out later. Yeah, turmeric is also good for inflammation. Very good for. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I know specifically what it's good for. Um, that and water. Water is real good. If you don't have enough water, your joints suffer. I mean, it's just natural, situation, right? No more FDA. Boy, I wish. Boy, I'll tell you what. Yeah, thank you. Is that Georgia S? Hey, YouTube, we are just talking. Yeah, I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions about this? Can you go look it up if you want, if you're interested? Again, my estimate of the situation is that we see both in the Old Testament. In Exodus, we're probably talking about the cannabis plant there in 30:23, because those two words are together. That I talked about Qaneh and Bessem. It's actually cinnamon and Bessem, so it's a spicy, stalky plant, right? And then there's probably the actual spicy cinnamon. But spices really aren't mentioned that much in any of the scriptures when you look at it. You know, you have aloe, you have aloe vera, you have myrrh and frankincense, and all kinds of things. But they're really not talked about a lot. Uh, I get that question all the time. What's your name? Chronic Abundance Nicola. Is that the Hebrew or Paleo Hebrew? Don't get wrapped around the axle on that. That's a distraction. The Paleo Hebrew was originally Phoenician, based on a Phoenician alphabet, Canaanite alphabet, because the Hebrews didn't have their own language, their own written language. Okay, that didn't show up until the Babylonian captivity, when they came up with the block Hebrew, which we use today. Okay, and even in the modern Hebrew, it's still not the same as biblical Hebrew. But at any rate, there's nothing wrong with the block Hebrew or the Paleo Hebrew. You're not going to get any real further understanding, maybe a slight bit, looking at both the Paleo and the block Hebrew. But don't get tied around the axle that you have to use the Paleo Hebrew. That's not true. That's very, very wrong. You're missing out if you do. Plus, there are 3 letters in the Paleo alphabet that are included in the block Hebrew that are not in the Paleo. And I've talked about those before. The Samic, the I'm having a brain cramp here. The Samic isn't there. The Zayan isn't there, and another one. And I always forget. I always remember 2 of the 3, and I can never remember the third one. So let me pull out my Gesenius, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I did this the other day when I was doing the same thing. Yeah, Samic, Tet. I always forget. Like I said, I always remember 2 of the 3, but not all of them. Here you are in Gesenius, okay? All right, here's the block Hebrew on this column right here. And then you can see over here you have, right, where'd it go? Right here, the ancient Hebrew, right there, that's what you're calling the Paleo Hebrew, okay? And it's very similar to, if you look at it, it's very similar to the Phoenician, which is right next to it. Okay, so the real idea was they just wanted to have an alphabet, a language that was totally theirs. And in my estimation, despite all the problems that they had during the Babylonian captivity, I do believe that the block Hebrew is inspired. I've looked at it above, below, sideways. I've dissected it, as I've shown you on many of my videos. For instance, you have let's see, what's a good one to use? Well, I used Aleph before. I might as well use it again. You can't do this with the Paleo Hebrew. Okay, you have doesn't like to write upside down. An Aleph, for instance. Okay, you can tear that letter apart, and you can do this to all of the Hebrew letters. They're all constructions of other letters, and they mean things when they're put together. And I showed you in a video 2, 3, 4 back where Aleph is a Vav with a Yod above and a Yod below. Gee. So we're talking about a fixed place, and the seed or hand of God is above, and the seed or hand of God is below. And when you do the gematria on that, the Vav is 6. Now I'm not going to be able to write on this. The Vav is 6. You have a 10 and a 10 for the 2 Vavs, and that's 26, which is also the same thing whoops, as this, which is the tetragrammaton, which you know is Jehovah, and it is 5, 6, 5, and 10. What is that? 26. So in other words, it's telling you that the Aleph is God, and it's this God right here. That's what it does for you. And I showed you that about 3 or 4 ago. You can't do that with a Paleo-Hebrew. You can't. I do believe that there was some kind of an inspiration or a revelation or something to Ezra, Jeremiah, and those guys there in the Babylonian captivity. I do believe that. Okay, any other questions? Again, don't get hung up on that you gotta use the Paleo-Hebrew. It's good to know it, like I know it, but it frankly doesn't give you any great insight. So that's just important. Okay, sorry I'm getting so close. I buy distilled water from food for less. Okay, let's see if there. Can you speak on Codex Alimentarius and the? Yeah, actually, most everybody probably knows Codex Alimentarius. They want to do away, for instance, with supplements. They want to define what foods you can have and what you can't. It's actually even going to get in a situation where you can't grow your own food. Yeah, that's a real quick summary of that whole thing. Look it up on Google, for instance. They will tell you what that is. Codex Alimentarius, absolutely. Yeah, actually, the Native Americans. I mean, one of the best sources of vitamin C are pine needle teas. Yeah, pine needle teas. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jehovah's a title, not a name. Yeah, and I go look at my religion series. It doesn't hurt to use it as a name. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's actually a system. It's God's system, and it's spelled out right there, which is why I constantly harp on the man-woman relationship and all the horrible things that are going on around the really bad things that are going on this gender stuff right now. That shows, if you believe in the Bible, it shows what that being is. His actual name. He uses many names. There are many names in the Old Testament. You've heard Lord of Hosts, for instance. That's one. Um, God Almighty, the Most High God, El Elyon, El Shaddai, there are all kinds of those. And those are names as well, but there are actually even more names that you get out of the story of the division of the Red Sea in Exodus. His other attribute names are listed there, and that's really the purpose of the story of the dividing of the Red Sea, or the dividing of chaos so that you can walk on dry ground. It's revealing the attributes that you need to bring into yourself that God holds and wants you to share with him. Okay? All right. Of course, there's the name that he told Moses. That's his name, right? The I am that I am, which is really I will be whom I will be. That's even more important. But it's a cognate. This is basically saying the same thing. Basically saying the same thing. So, Yod He Vah He Ahaya Asher Ahaya, which is I will be whom I will be. The I am, that's all right there. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see if we got some others here I can answer. Yeah, that's right. Rains of healing. Yeah, you just go right out to a pine tree. I'm talking about the needle type, not the leafy one types. Although you could probably do it with that too, but definitely the needle types. Take those off, throw them in some boiling water, and drink the tea, and you've got a really, really good vitamin C tea that you can drink if you're not feeling well, or just to avoid getting scurvy. If you haven't had any fruit in a long time. Now, see, watchful and alert. You got to be careful here. Watchful and alert saying Hova, according to Strong's, means God of ruin and mischief. I'm not saying that isn't true, but you got to be careful of the vowels. The vowels are important, and the context. All right. frankly, if you really want to look at it, what is this word right here? And I've talked about this before. I'm talking about context is important. If you're ignoring the context, if you're just taking the word out, and I gave you an example, red and red the color, R-E-D. But what if I meant I want you to read something, R-E-A-D? You see where the context would be important? Don't get wrapped around. You can use Strong's, but you've got to be careful. Context is everything. All right, you got to look at it from context. Hava means living. Eve, the mother of all living, which is the same thing. The hey and the het are interchangeable, by the way. Hava, in this form, means, actually, Yahovah means he exists or he breathes, because that's in the correct context with the correct vowels. It means he breathes, the self-existent one. So be very careful. It's like I showed you the difference between, it was several, I think it was a couple months back. I showed you where the same word, depending on context, and the word was Kodesh, which normally, okay, you look that up. Look Kodesh up in the Strongs, and you'll see that there are two different meanings in there depending upon context and the vowels that are used. Kodesh means blessed. But it can also mean impure. Go back and look at that video, okay? Context and vowels are everything. So if you're going to use Strong's, which I encourage, you've got to understand the nuances, okay? And the way you do that is by going to the original as it's written in the Hebrew Bible and looking at how the context is used. What have I done with cinnamon and cannabis here? That's exactly what I've done, is I've put it in context. So don't get wrapped around the axle on those things, all right? Real important not to. Matter of fact, I think I've got it right here. When I did that lesson, let me see if I've got that here. I may have it, I may not. Yeah, I probably don't. I try to keep all my lessons pretty close so I can grab them if I need them. Pardon me, everybody. You can talk with each other for a minute. Let me just see if I have this information that I just explained on the Kodesh. I don't know if I do or not. I think I do. Just for edification, for I'm pretty sure this is it here. If it's not, well, go back and look at my lessons and you'll see it. Put on my glasses here. I'm pretty sure it's in here. Let's see. I wanted to show it to you so you know what I'm talking about. But maybe I don't have it anymore. Oh, yes, I do. Okay. Kodesh, and I gave this in a lesson here. It was something to do with concubines. Go back to my lesson on concubines, okay? And I talked about it. And I showed you that Kodesh, which is words 6944 and 6942 means blessed, right? But the same word with a slightly different vowel, Kodash, means sodomite. Kodesh, same. If you look it up in the Strongs, and if you look up Kuf, Dalet, Shin, you'll find blessed and you'll find sodomite. How do you know which one it's going to be unless you don't know unless you know the vowel points in the context? Okay, and then of course I showed that. Then of course a harlot is Kadeshah, which is Kuf, Dalet, Shin, the Kodesh with a hay on the end. Right, so you got to be careful. Got to be real careful. There's a lot to be learned there. As it says in the New Testament, you have to rightly divide the Word of God. Even Strong's doesn't get it right a lot of times. They don't know what Selah means. I had to show you that because they couldn't get outside their traditional Christian expectations. Another one that I showed you on that same concubine thing was the word out of Kings. Let me go back to that just as another example because Strong's didn't want to go here. Okay? It's the kava. In Strong's and in the King James Version, they render it as musicians. It's about when the king got upset that Daniel, the Persian king, got upset that Daniel, he was tricked into throwing Daniel into the lion's den. And he couldn't sleep all night. And he rejected anything that his court tried to bring him to comfort him. And one of the things that it says in the King James Version is, the way it's translated is, he didn't want the musicians, the minstrels. What? In his bedroom? No. Strong's admits that while it's translated as musicians, very much more likely the word is concubines. So the king did not want his concubines with him. Okay? That's what it really was. And the word is dekava. In other words, the name for Eve is right in it. So these were women who were the door to Edenic pleasures. Concubine. Perfectly lawful, even though it doesn't go along with our sensitivities or our understandings today. Because there was a contract involved. So it's concubine. Pardon me. Yuck. Yeah, I'm still draining from that sinus infection. Almost done, though. Almost done. All right, we've gone for almost an hour. I think I've probably blown enough people's minds today. I won't do any more. So again, in the description box, you have 2 links where you can study the etymology and the history of the word cinnamon or cannabis and see that there's some disagreement over whether we're talking about the spicy cinnamon that you put in your coffee, right, in your hot chocolate or whatever, or if we're talking about the cannabis. And I think it depends on the context, and it might be that it's talking about that all the time, just in different ways. I have no doubt that medicinal herbs were used throughout history. We already know that. Cannabis has been around for at least, or cinnamon rather, the regular cinnamon at least from 2800 BC. And of course, when they didn't know how to divide the different plants, or wouldn't, they just use a regular type of catch-all. So in this case, it was spicy stalked plant. Okay, might be interesting. Maybe you should. Maybe I shouldn't advise that. Maybe you can check. You try sometime when you use some cinnamon. Don't use any sugar. Don't use any sugar at all, and see if cinnamon gives you a relaxing feeling. Maybe it does, because it's all in that same category, right? All right. Again, the description box, I think you'll enjoy that. It'll give you some insights. I've gone through it quickly here, but showing you kind of during a discussion how you can apply it. And keep your minds open. Don't let these people in modern day shut your curiosity down and make you have to go along with their interpretations because they have an agenda, whether it be the destruction of mankind, which is the worst thing, or somebody just wants to have your money or your time, etc. I show you the things that I do so that you can go and start looking at these things yourself. And just like with this word, I've admitted that it could be either cinnamon or cannabis. It's probably both, right? All right. Eyes on the horizon, ears to the ground, situational awareness on high. Prep, pray, stay out of the way. Um, I'm not going to comment too much on any of the other things. Go listen to Alexander Mercouris, Alex Cristoforo, the Duran, Brian Berletic of the New Atlas, Scott Ritter. If you want to know about some of the things that are happening geopolitically, I think they've got it right. Colonel Douglas McGregor. We are being sold down the river on a pretense to helping somebody. Okay, as I showed you last night, I showed you all those tools. The problem was the slotted screwdriver with the screw with the hex on it, and none of the tools worked. And more importantly, the tools could not integrate and be used together in an effective manner. And that's all they're doing to Ukraine. They're sending them these weapons. The weapons don't integrate. They don't fit the situation. They can't use them in combined arms warfare because, again, they're not integrated. They're not systems integrated. It's just a waste. And the poor people in Ukraine, and of course the Russian troops, Russian people in general, are cannon fodder for this. Putin's done nothing wrong except possibly trusting the West, and they're never going to trust them again. The West lies. These are liars, deceivers, evil, evil people. I don't mean the whole country, although we're very subject to that. I'm talking about those people that live in the Beltway, live in New York City, London, Davos, and possibly the Vatican. When I say the Vatican, that includes a lot of things, not just the Catholic hierarchy. All right, everybody. We'll see you later out here. Hope you had that. It was a little enjoyable anyway, a little break.